Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here today. We just mentioned Baikonur, and probably that's a good opportunity to define what actually innovation is. I think there's probably a misconception that innovation is science and technology, but actually it is not just science and technology. It is also process, it is also design, it is also organization, and it is also product. With this in mind, I would like to discuss with you today three questions. The first one is, what are the usual misconceptions about innovation and innovation policies? And let me start with the first one, that innovation is national, that innovation takes a long time to implement. Well, what you'll see on this graph is the number of scientific articles published by a number of countries, and the lines between the different bubbles shows you the co-authorship between countries. We're now back in time, in 1998. Let's move forward. We're now in 2003. Notice China. We're now in 2008. Notice China. The image I would like you to keep is that innovation is a network. It's connected, not just at the national level, but at the global level. And it doesn't take that long to actually innovate. A second myth about innovation policy is that it doesn't need a strategy. It doesn't need intervention. What you see on this map is the number of patents per million inhabitants in Europe. The darker the color, the more patents. The lighter, the less patents. Effectively, innovation, 50% of innovation in OECD countries happen in 30% of regions. It's only about 20 regions that innovate. So the question is, do you intervene or you don't? How do you link regional development with innovation? How do you make sure it's not just focused in specific areas? Just to give you an example of this, I'm sure you all have one of those. Well, let's talk about innovation for the iPod or the iPhone. Usually a myth that this is true innovation. It's not. It's design, it's marketing, it's software development with iTunes. The actual technology is based in Cambridge, in the UK. And it's about 400 suppliers that have contributed to this innovation in Asia, in the US, in the UK. The real innovation was a consumer innovation. Now, with this in mind, let's turn to Kazakhstan. What is the current state of innovation in Kazakhstan? The country has gone through a very steep learning curve back from the 90s and is now getting at the stage where there is an acceleration of policies. In 2003, a breakthrough, the foundation of the National Innovation Fund, and then over the past few years, the acceleration of the industrialization and innovation program. This is the right direction, and the learning curve here is very strong. There are yet very strong opportunities to innovate even more by connecting different policies to create a coherent innovation strategy, by connecting regional development with the national innovation strategy, but also by potentially increasing the R&D spending. And don't get me wrong, R&D is not just a key to innovation, it's a part of it. And at the OECD level, R&D represents 2.2% of GDP on average. In Kazakhstan, we're about 0.25, 0.5. We could get to 1%. It could actually even get to 2% of GDP. That could be more in line with OECD averages. Now, let's probably turn to what could be done in Kazakhstan. What type of strategy and what type of implementation? If you look at this graph, you'll notice most innovative countries in the world. In the upper right corner, you'll notice Switzerland. Switzerland is a country that has been innovating through private sector and universities. That's the upper right corner. Some other countries, including Russia or Kazakhstan, are yet in an area where they have to innovate a lot more from a private sector development point of view, although a lot of efforts have been going on. And there are two options. One option is to focus on fundamentals, building the core capabilities. That is human capital policies, that is talent management, that is infrastructure, investments. The unit of analysis here is the person, is the individual. How do you build innovation around the person? A second option is to focus on competition. And here the unit of analysis is the company. How do you provide, for example, or develop a world-class innovation fund? And this country is on the right path to do so. How do you provide tax breaks, like in many other countries? How do you attract small and medium enterprises from all around the world in Kazakhstan? And the question is not, is it one or the other? It's actually both to get to the 2030 innovation targets. Both are needed for this country. What does it mean in practice? If you look at the past generation of reforms, there has been already 2 very strong generations of reform in innovation. There's now a need for a 3rd generation, focusing both on horizontal policies, that is education, investment, competition, and so on, but also vertical policies. Where are the innovation gaps across different sectors of the economy? How to intervene? Competition and fundamentals, but that is not enough. There is also a need for a 4th generation of reform. And here, the question is, what is the role of the state? And probably the role of the state should be to intervene less over time. What you want to get to is this virtuous circle where clusters, networks operate on their own, with venture capital funds, with private equity funds, with training provided by the private sector. That is when it actually operates well. And the role of the state should be diminishing over time, focusing on removing policy barriers. With this in mind, the next stage is now to address some key questions. What will be the role of the private sector? How to align bodies for the private sector and the public sector? What will be the role of the state? And the point now is to develop a very detailed plan on the innovation until 2030, and I look forward to working on this topic with you and answering any questions that you have. Thank you very much.